Robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching and listening to GB News. Coming up on The Political Correction, we're talking about the Queen's speech delivered by the Prince of Wales this week. We're joined by MP Lee Anderson to discuss his comments about food banks. And we're discussing NATO after the Prime Minister visited Finland and Sweden to bolster international confidence. That plus plenty more after your latest news with Miranda.
Good morning, it's 10 o'clock. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Allies backing Finland and Sweden's NATO membership are pushing for a swift ratification process if they apply to join the alliance. Foreign ministers from 30 member countries are in Berlin for an informal meeting, with the UK's Liz Truss saying NATO's open-door policy must be maintained. The talks come after Russia's President Putin warned Finland it would be a mistake to join.
We were very pleased to be joined by our friends Finland and Sweden. If they do apply to join NATO, the UK is strongly supportive of that. We're also working closely with the Ukrainians and the Poles and others to make sure that Ukraine has NATO standard defence. It's also important today that we focus on a global NATO, because as well as protecting Euro-Atlantic security, we also need to watch out for Indo-Pacific security too.
Russia's offensive in the Donbass region has lost momentum and fallen behind schedule, according to British military intelligence. It's as President Zelensky says Ukraine's counter-offensive has forced Russian troops to retreat from some areas of Kharkiv in the northeast of the country. The region's governor says troops have made ground near the Russian-held town of Izium, where Moscow's forces have been trying to fight their way south. The Prime Minister will urge Northern Ireland's politicians to get back to work after the DUP blocked the election of a speaker in the Stormont Assembly. Boris Johnson will travel to Belfast tomorrow for a series of crisis talks. Government sources say he'll use a series of private meetings to say parties must come together if problems with the protocol are to be fixed. NHS prescription charges in England will be frozen for the first time in 12 years to help ease the cost of living crisis. Health Secretary Sajid Javid says the charges, which normally rise in line with inflation, will be held this year to put money back in people's pockets. The Health Department says the freeze will save patients £17 million. 10 people have been killed and 3 injured in a mass shooting at a supermarket in New York State. The local mayor says an 18-year-old gunman travelled for hours to reach Buffalo, a predominantly black neighbourhood. The FBI say they're investigating the shooting as both a hate crime and an act of racially motivated violent extremism. District Attorney John Flynn says the gunman has been remanded into custody.
The individual has been arraigned on murder in the first degree, which is the highest murder charge in New York State. Carries with it a sentence of life without parole, the highest punishment we have in New York State. A felony hearing will now take place in 5 days, and then the investigation continues. So we have taken the appropriate steps right now to get him behind bars.
Extra security measures have stopped nearly 20,000 attempts to smuggle drugs and weapons into prisons over the last 2 years. Justice Secretary Dominic Raab says X-ray body scanners and drug tracing machines are helping to enforce a zero-tolerance approach to drugs, knives and mobile phones. Former Australia cricket all-rounder Andrew Symonds has died in a car crash aged 46. Police are investigating the single-vehicle accident in Queensland from last night. Symonds played 26 tests, 198 one-day internationals and won the World Cup in 2003 and 2007. And the Prime Minister has praised Ukraine after winning the Eurovision Song Contest. Boris Johnson called the win not only a reflection of talent, but unwavering support for the country's fight for freedom. Folk rap group Kalush Orchestra performed Stefania, which topped the poll, whilst the UK's Sam Ryder came in second place with his pop song Spaceman. Well, this is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Back now to the political correction.
Good morning, you're watching and listening to GB News, and this is The Political Correction. I'm Gianna Davison, and today I'm joined in the studio by the wonderful Paul Embry, and in Northern Ireland by the one and only Arlene Foster. We're here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. This is not about journalists talking to journalists, it's about you telling us what you think. Coming up this hour, we'll be joined by MP Lee Anderson to discuss his comments this week that if people knew how to cook better, they would save money in the face of rising prices. We're talking about the Queen's speech delivered this week by the Prince of Wales. And we're talking about the ongoing war in Ukraine after Boris Johnson visited Finland and Sweden to sign mutual defence agreements in the face of Russian aggression. And here's what Foreign Secretary Liz Truss had to say in Berlin on the way into the NATO summit.
We were very pleased to be joined by our friends Finland and Sweden. If they do apply to join NATO, the UK is strongly supportive of that. We're also working closely with the Ukrainians and the Poles and others to make sure that Ukraine has NATO standard defence. It's also important today that we focus on a global NATO, because as well as protecting Euro-Atlantic security, we also need to watch out for Indo-Pacific security too.
And as ever here on The Political Correction, we want to hear from you. So if you want to get involved in the conversation and have your email read out on the show today, then email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us @gbnews. This is The Political Correction. Well, we've just seen the clip there, and the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has been in Germany, attending G7 and NATO foreign ministers' meetings, in which she urged international allies to go further and faster to support Ukrainian resistance. Her visit comes after Prime Minister Boris Johnson travelled to Finland and Sweden to sign mutual defence agreements. Finland has been subsequently warned by the Deputy Chairman of the Duma Defence Committee in Russia that they would be wiped out in seconds if they joined NATO. So, Paul, I'm going to start with you here. It's pretty aggressive words there, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm slightly concerned, Deanna, that we are in Britain becoming almost like a global security company. I'm not sure that we've got the wherewithal to be able to make good on some of these commitments that we're making. I mean, Boris Johnson said recently that we will arm and support Ukraine to the extent where it will never be invaded again. That seems to me to be a colossal commitment. We've now said to the Swedes and the Finns that we're willing to enter into a security pact, which could potentially, as Boris Johnson confirmed, end up at some point with Britain putting troops on the ground in those places. And it seems to me that, you know, when you consider that over recent years, our own armed forces have been ravaged and are really not, you know, a shadow effectively of what they once were. I'm just very concerned that we are spreading ourselves so thinly now. I condemn the invasion of Ukraine by Putin. I think we should support the Ukrainians in repelling that invasion. But I don't think we should be acting as the world's policeman as we are, because I don't think we have that power to do so. I'm also slightly worried, actually, at some of the rhetoric. I mean, this seems to me to be a time not for more sabre rattling, but for a time for taking some of the heat out of the situation. And I don't see much of that. I don't see it from the UN. I don't see it from the British government. I don't see it from European leaders. I don't see it from NATO. And it seems to me that what's going to happen in response to this is that things are going to escalate. And I think that could pose a real problem for world peace.
But surely, given the sabre-rattling that's already going on, it's completely fair that countries like Finland and Sweden would want to have that extra protection from NATO, isn't it?
Well, you can perfectly understand from their point of view why they would want to join NATO, but equally, you I think have to look at things perhaps from the point of view of ordinary Russians who see NATO, for example, which was created in the late 40s directly as a counter to the threat of the Soviet Union, coming closer and closer to their borders. And this is something actually that even His Holiness the Pope raised recently about the tactics of NATO eastward expansion. It's been raised by Mikhail Gorbachev. It's been raised by even people like Henry Kissinger. So whether or not it's wise for NATO to court those countries is a different question. And I was struck by the response of the Australians and the Americans to the Solomon Islands, which recently signed a security pact with China. And the Australians and Americans have expressed very serious concerns about it. The Australians said that if China were to base its fleet there, it would be a red line. And I thought, well, hold on a second. I thought we were in favour of the sovereignty of nations and the right of nations to be able to enter into security pacts of their own choosing. So it seems to me, as usual, that Western foreign policy on this is somewhat hypocritical.
Arlene, what's been your stance? Because those words there from the Russians are pretty aggressive, aren't they, towards Finland?
Well, good morning, and I think that's the point. I mean, Paul talks about escalation. There's nobody escalating this more than the Russians. Obviously, Finland and Sweden have been partners of NATO since 1990. They've now, there wasn't any desire to join NATO until Russian aggression in the Ukraine and the fact that they invaded Ukraine in such an aggressive way. And I think they're well within their rights, their sovereign rights, to decide now we want to be full members of NATO and to be a part of that defensive pact, because they're worried and they're concerned about the aggression of Putin and his desire, his imperial desire to spread his wings. If the RPM doesn't step up in leadership, who will? Because we're not going to see any leadership from Biden or Macron or Scholz. And I think, to disagree with Paul, I think our Prime Minister has shown real leadership in terms of the Ukrainian crisis. And he continues to show that leadership in Ukraine. And I think we should support him in doing that. What he's doing here is supporting Finland and Sweden. They are making their own decision in relation to NATO membership. He is saying, if you decide to do that, we will support you. And I think that that's very important, because our place in the world, our place as global Britain, as the term goes, of course I would prefer it was global UK for very obvious reasons, is very important. And I think the PM is right to make these noises and to say to Putin, who seems to only understand strength or weakness. So are we going to be on the side of weakness, or are we going to be on the side of strength? And I think the PM has made the right decision in relation to that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Arlene. Well, we're going to get some more insights now from Major General Chip Chapman, who joins us today. Chip, thank you for joining us. What have you made of the kind of moves from Finland and Sweden towards NATO membership? Do you think it's the right approach?
Well, the paradox of the Russian position is all the things they don't want to occur because of their actions. And it's not really for Russia to caveat the sovereign choices of Finland and Sweden. So if you go back to 2019, the public opinion in favour of joining NATO in Sweden was around 20%. In Finland, it's 30%. Since February the 24th, when the invasion started, it's gone up to over 76% in Finland and below that in Sweden. So it is the actions of Russia which have led Finland down this place. It's also worth saying, of course, that Finlandization became a noun in the English language after Russia did exactly that to caveat the sovereignty of Finland with the Winter War of 1939-1940. Finlandization being this notion that your foreign policy is caveated by a stronger power. That is exactly why the countries which left the Soviet Union after the breakup post-90 wanted to join NATO. They feared a revanchist Russia, and that's exactly what has come to pass.
Do you think in Russia, this will be seen as an escalation by the West?
Well, you can escalate in 7 ways: by targets, objectives, weapons, domains, which is cyber or space, by geography, if they extend the theatre of war into NATO, or by the rhetoric. So we're seeing the escalation by the rhetoric. I don't think the public in Russia know too much because of the propaganda machine of Putin. But the people you can't pull the wool over are the soldiers who are fighting and dying in Ukraine. That is a weakness for Putin, as is the potential for elites leaving him in the future. So that's 2 parts of what we call the Clausewitzian Trinity. And all 3 of those must be in sort of sync for you to campaign successfully. I don't think this campaign is looking like it's going in a successful way at the moment.
Mr. Chapman, we often hear the argument that Russia, Putin, has imperialist ambitions. But, I mean, isn't the truth that the power of Russia is nothing of the power of the old Soviet Union? And actually the proof of that is the fact that, 3 months into the invasion of Ukraine, and they still haven't really got a foothold in this country, in that country. So the idea that Russia is on an exercise to increase its imperial power, I mean, that's just nonsense, isn't it?
There's a difference between being a superpower and a super problem, and they are not a superpower and they are a super problem. And you have to look at their enduring grand strategic objectives to really answer that question, of which under Putin there are 2. One is to enhance their spheres of influence and regain lost territory, and the second one is to re-establish Russia as a great power. They are enduring things, and that's what grand strategy is. And therefore, the real problem we have is that leaders may change. Putin may go at some stage, although he could be there until 2036. Vital interests rarely change, and geography never changes. That is the problem with, of course, you're always going to have a border between Russia and Ukraine, assuming that Ukraine maintains itself as a sovereign country, which I think it will do, and of course a border with Finland.
So at the minute, there's a huge emphasis on trying to find diplomatic solutions. Do you think that's likely in this case, given Russia's general aggression towards Ukraine?
Well, all wars are fought for political objectives. So the object of war is a better peace, but it's from whose perspective and whose rules will apply. So from a Ukrainian perspective, of course, a better peace for them is that Russia, which originally, of course, invaded Crimea and the Donbass in 2014, is that those are returned to the sovereign part of Ukraine. From a Russian perspective now, I think their original objectives were maximalist. That is, they did want to take over the whole of Ukraine and used faulty intelligence and thought they could do the thunder run and overturn their political polity in Kyiv by D+3. They've now got more minimalist objectives, I think, which is to do with potentially annexing the Donbass in the future and having this land corridor to Crimea. So that's minimalist at the moment. Now, if things don't go well, that really puts us in a difficult position because you have sort of only scenarios, not certainties. And the real scenarios are something like Liz Truss saying that this will go on for 10 years or Blinken saying that we don't know how long this will last, which is probably more accurate. But the third one is actually a short war scenario where the Russian army actually collapses in the next few weeks. We think that they're at the position in the Donbass where they, in military terms, we call culminating. That is, their offensive power will be exhausted within the next 2 or 3 weeks. Now, that means they can either go on the defensive or there'll be a Ukrainian counterattack, which might push them out. Now, that is really dangerous at the moment because that does lead to the potential for escalation in military doctrine from the Russian perspective. And in the House Armed Services Committee on the 17th of March this year, General Scotty Berrier, who I used to work with, did say that this is the most dangerous time when the Russian equipment or manpower are sapped by the Ukrainians, because that does potentially lead to an escalation from the Russians.
Thanks, Chip. Arlene?
Yeah, so thanks, Chip, for coming on. I think it's been really important to talk about all of this. And from my point of view, Putin is confusing ability and to actually progress this war and his ambitions. But in any event, what I wanted to ask you the question about was the Foreign Secretary today, as she was going into her meeting, made comments just at the end of her comments around the fact that she wanted NATO to be a global organisation. And that, to me, was pointing to the problems down in China and the Indo-Pacific region, which we shouldn't take our eyes off. Do you think NATO needs to keep an eye on that, as well as obviously deal with the issues in the Ukrainian region?
Is that for me, Arlene?
Yeah, it is, Chip, yeah.
Of course, that plays into the narrative of a global Britain, which the government have. I do think I agree with Paul here that we can talk a great big global game, but we haven't really got a big stick. So it is also very difficult to see any scenarios where you would actually have a conflict with China. Now, a lot of people talk about Taiwan, of course, but we are absolutely years away from anything happening on that. And one of the probably learning points from Ukraine is that it's probably pushed that even further back. And of course, what you really want in all these situations, both in Ukraine and China, ultimately, is to go back sort of to something which happened in the early 70s, which is rather than have death and destruction on the left of arc and diplomacy on the right of arc, we want this absolute détente where everyone agrees to a sort of common security architecture, and that sort of the globalization of the economy works for everyone in the world.
Well, Chip, thank you so much for joining us this morning to share your insights, which I think we'll all agree were genuinely fascinating. And Major General Chip Chapman there, former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence. Now, Boris Johnson has pledged to grow and strengthen the economy through new measures introduced in the Queen's speech, which was read out this week by the Prince of Wales, with the Queen missing the state opening of Parliament for the first time in almost 60 years. In the speech, which contained 38 bills, Prince Charles said the government will level up opportunity in all parts of the country and support more people into work. So what do we make of it? Paul, I want to come to you first, because it was quite a chunky one. I mean, 38 bills here announced in it, but I think you're more concerned about the bits that are missing, aren't you?
I would have liked to have seen an employment bill, which the government promised in the Queen's speech 2 years ago, Deanna, and nothing has materialised since. Now, we've seen recently with P&O being a good example, what it can mean for some workers in terms of not having the right workplace protections. We've got millions of people now in insecure employment in the gig economy, working on 0 hours contracts. And the government promised, in fact, even in its 2019 manifesto, that it would give better protection for workers in that kind of situation, you know, people who are working irregular and shifts that are not guaranteed, people on, you know, for example, 0 hours contracts, and even talks about bringing in a single enforcement body to make sure that those protections were respected in the workplace. So, you know, I think that was a significant failing in the current climate not to have that employment bill in there. And when you look really at insecure work and the state of it in this country, it's actually a cost to the Treasury. I mean, the Treasury loses out, I think, something like about £10 billion a year in terms of a reduced tax take, in terms of higher social security payments as a result of people working in insecure employment. So I think that was a significant lacuna. I think it brings into question, actually, the government's commitment in its manifesto to improve workers' rights in this country. I think that was something that's quite easy to say, but when it comes to delivering on it, it doesn't seem that they're very serious about it. And I would urge them, even at this stage, to make sure that that's brought about at some point.
Thanks, Paul. Arlene, what were your sort of key takeaways from the Queen's speech this week?
Well, obviously, the visuals of the Queen's speech were very strong, with Her Majesty not being able, because of mobility issues, to come to the Palace of Westminster. But for me, it showed the continuity of the Crown. We had Prince Charles there. Prince William was also there. So I think that shows that the Crown continues. And it was wonderful later on in the week to see Her Majesty at the Royal Horse Show and to see her smiling face. That was really very warming. But in terms of the content of the speech, you're right, there is a lot in there. Of course, we will always try and look for the bits that we want to see in there as well. Paul has done it with the Employment Rights Bill. I'm going to do it with the protocol, because I was disappointed to see that it wasn't specifically mentioned, although there is some language around protecting the institutions of the Belfast Agreement, which of course the protocol doesn't do. And I know we're going to talk about that later on. So I I'll leave that there. But I do think it was a chunky enough speech, but the most natural thing is to look for the bits that we want to see in there as well.
I think it'd be remiss of me not to talk about some of the key stuff that is in there very quickly to whiz through. There's going to be a new levelling up and regeneration bill, which is all going to be about sort of planning, and I think it's kind of forcing owners of empty shops to put them into good use. There's going to be a transport bill to enshrine Great British Rail. The online safety bill is finally going to go through. A new public order bill to try and crack down on some of these very disruptive protests that we've been seeing happen around the country. Finally, a Brexit freedoms bill, which I think many of us will agree is long overdue. A new schools bill, an energy security bill, something we've spoken about quite a lot on this show, and an economic crime bill as well, just some of the key headlines. But 38 bills is going to be tricky for the government to get through in a year, isn't it, Arlene?
Yes, it is. And if they deal with the protocol, that will be 39, Anna. So
well, let's round it up to 40. Let's get Paul's employment bill in there. And I think we've just about managed it. Well, Queen's speech, huge story from this week. And obviously, as Arlene said, some incredible visuals there, seeing it, but also with the Queen missing, which I think many of us were quite saddened by. But coming up after the break, we're joined by MP Lee Anderson, following comments he made this week in the House of Commons about cooking and budgeting. And as ever, we want to hear from you today on the political correction. So if you want to get involved, email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. Don't go anywhere.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. And as always, loads of you have been getting in contact with us today. We've got David here who said, had Russia not been so very aggressive over the years, then different countries would not look to join NATO, so Russia has only themselves to blame for the expansion of NATO. Arlene, you've got some views for us as well.
Yeah, so Marianne says bullies like Putin have no right to dictate what other sovereign countries decide is in their best interest. Boris has shown that you stand up to bullies. You don't just stand on the sideline. We made that mistake with Crimea when Crimea was invaded. Strength in numbers has to be to everyone's advantage.
Mm-hmm. Paul?
Yeah, slightly different take from Susan, who says, I do agree that we, along with the rest of Europe, should be helping Ukraine to see off Russian aggression and bring back peace. But I'm also concerned about the amount of money that the government is spending on a war that really isn't ours at this time, when we have a very serious cost of living crisis. Of course, we need to make Russia realise that Ukraine has strength behind them, but I'm not sure that this kind of rhetoric coming from the PM and Liz Truss is not going to lead to Russia sending a strong message in a military capacity to the UK.
Interesting there. Well, I've got another David who says, I agree with Paul's assessment. Oh, we can't be having that. It says, we can't afford to keep sending money and equipment, and our military is in no position to threaten Russia with any reprisals. Arlene, any more from you?
Yeah, so while I agree, this is Paul agreeing with Paul Embry to some extent, but then saying he must remember that Putin has threatened Finland and Sweden as well as the UK. Russian ministers are so childish, throwing around nuclear threats. They're like children in the school playground. They really need to grow up. The other point is that NATO is a defensive organisation.
Thanks, Arlene. And do keep your views coming in to us on GBViews at gbnews.uk or tweeting us at GBnews. Now, Conservative MP Lee Anderson caused controversy this week by saying that if people knew how to cook better, they would save money. The MP for Ashfield said that meals could be cooked for as little as 30 pence a day and suggested that cooking and budgeting courses would benefit people across the country. Some have backed the comments, but others have said the MP is out of touch. Well, let's find out from the man himself. We're joined by Lee Anderson, the MP for Ashfield. Lee, thank you for joining us this morning. Can you understand why people were quite concerned by your comments?
I can, Deanna, and good morning. When you see a newspaper like the Daily Mirror print outrageous front-page headlines like poor people can't cook, then of course the public are going to be outraged. I never said once that poor people can't cook. In fact, I would say that people who are poorer make some of the best cooks because they have to. They have to manage on a small budget. They have to be resourceful. They have to be creative. So that's absolute nonsense. I think the point I was trying to make was that, you know, some people who go to the food bank do like some skills like budgeting and cooking, and we've proved that. The nation's media was down at my food bank yesterday, checking out on some of the users there, and these were people on low incomes, and they were on cooking and budgeting courses. They were very, very positive, and the media went away not getting the story they wanted.
Mm-hmm. Well, Lee, you've been getting quite a backlash also on Twitter, which, as we know, is not quite real life. But one of the things that's been thrown at you are people asking if you're out of touch. So are you?
No, don't be silly, Deanna. I'm not out of touch. I've never lived more than 5 miles from where I was born. I'm embedded in this community. I will be out this afternoon. I was in my town centre yesterday, and the reaction of people in the town centre, people I didn't even know, were coming up shaking my hand and saying, you know what, you're saying what we've all been thinking for a very long time. Good on you. Now, this project we're running is not about me demonising poor people. It's about helping some of the most vulnerable members in society. Now, look, I have one particular family that goes to the food bank once a week, but then goes to McDonald's twice a week. Now, I'm not saying a family shouldn't take its 2 or 3 children to McDonald's once in a while. Absolutely not. But what I am saying is that if they could save some of that money from time to time, they could go out and spend that money on the high streets at a local butcher's, a fruit and veg shop, come to our cooking courses and learn how to make wholesome, nutritious meals on a budget, at the same time teaching their children the life skills that they're going to need as well.
Mr. Anderson, I mean, whatever legitimate point you may have had about food education in this country, and I think it's fair to say actually that it's perhaps a generational thing. We don't have the level of food education in this country that we once did. But there's another factor here, isn't there? And it's whether or not government is doing enough for people in this cost of living crisis. I mean, we've just had a decade or more of austerity under your government. You've cut universal credit for some of the poorest families. You won't put a windfall tax on the energy companies to help alleviate some of the pressures that people have got in terms of their fuel bills. Real wages are falling. So it's not just about teaching people how to make beans on toast. It's about getting money into people's pockets through taking the right economic measures, isn't it?
So have you ever spoken to food bank users?
Yes.
And what they said to you?
Well, a myriad of things, as they always would.
OK, like what?
Well, do you want me to recount whole conversations I've had with food bank users? I mean, I'd ask you to answer the question that I put to you. The reality is that your government isn't doing enough. So simply lecturing people about how to boil an egg isn't going to cut it, is it? You need to do more economically to get money into people's pockets.
So I take it you've not actually spoken to any food bank users. That's normally the case when people like you have a go at me. I speak to lots of food bank users embedded in my community, and the government is providing billions and billions of pounds of support, local support, which people can access. If people are struggling, they can get in contact with me or the local authority. for that extra support. There's £22 billion gone in to help some of the most vulnerable families in this country. I'm trying to do my bit for my community to make sure that they make the best use of the money they've got available. What are you doing?
Well, I'd say, I've been an active trade unionist all of my life, and I fight for people in the workplace, and I'm very proud of that. What are you doing in terms of universal credit? Did you oppose the cut to universal credit? What are you doing in terms of a windfall tax on the energy companies? Are you supporting that? Are you supporting real measures that will alleviate the pressures from on people, or are you just lecturing them about how to make
I'm supporting this government, making sure we've got an economy that's growing, which it is, that there's jobs. I think there's 1 million vacancies in this country. I challenge you, Paul. Is it Paul? I challenge you to come up to my constituency in Ashfield, come and visit the food bank I help at, come and talk to the service users there, come and talk to the most vulnerable members of my society. Get off your high horse, come up here and speak to some real people instead of your champagne socialists.
Well,
how's that grab you?
Let me say, when it comes to talking to real people, you don't have a monopoly on that. I speak to real people all the time. I'm rooted in the Labour movement. I come from a working class community. And in terms of food banks, I probably won't need to come to your constituency, Mr. Anderson, because there are so many food banks. There are so many food banks in this country now that I could just go down the road.
I think I need to act as referee here and just break this up. But Lee, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is the actual classes that you've been running, because you've been helping, haven't you? I've seen you with your chef's hat on your Twitter. How have they been going down in your local community?
What we're trying to do, and remember, this is not about me, totally about me. This is about a fantastic food bank we have in Ashfield that's set up this initiative where when food bank users come along, they register on a cooking course, a budgeting course, to learn those life skills which many people have missed out on in the past. And it's been a great success. You know, just yesterday when the press, on Friday, when the press came, we were talking to people who've never had these skills before. There's one lady didn't even know how to cook vegetables. It's you know, we're really trying our best locally to help people in what are difficult times. This is not just about keep throwing money like the Labour Party want. They want to tax the poor more and more. This is about helping people with real problems on the ground, live their life the best way they can.
Thanks, Lee. Arlene?
So, Lee, good to see you. I mean, I fundamentally believe in self-help, and one of the reasons why I was a huge supporter of uniformed organisations like the Girl Guides is that they used to teach these sort of skills in terms of getting young women to understand the need to budget and how you cook, albeit my cooking wasn't great at guide camp. But anyway, I diverge. I go off on a tangent. What I wanted to really ask you was, is this a very good example of Twitter versus the real world? Because what you're trying to do is focus on how you can help families in your constituency to get the skills that they need, whereas Twitter is wanting to jump all over you because you're trying to say that you can cook a meal for 30p.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Arlene. I mean, Twitter's not the real world. There's a different name for Twitter. I changed the syllable slightly to give my description. But you know what? It's the left, it's the Labour Party, it's the unions. They like poor people because poor people are their meal ticket. They like to see people in misery because that gives them the very reason for their existence. But I'll tell you what, some of the most vulnerable people in my society, the poorer people, have turned their back on the Labour Party and the unions, and they're looking to people like me in their communities to help them because they know I live here, I care about the people in my community, and I will go hell for leather to help every single person in the constituency of Ashfield.
Well, Lee, thank you so much for joining us on the show this morning to talk about what's been quite a busy week for you, I imagine, with media. So thank you for making time for us here at GB News. Now, Boris Johnson has urged workers to get back to the office, saying that cutting down on remote working would boost productivity and revive town and city centres in the UK. The comments come as it was revealed that 91,000 jobs are to be axed from the civil service to free up cash in a bid to ease the cost of living crisis. Minister for Brexit Opportunities and Government Efficiency, Jacob Rees-Mogg, defended the proposals, saying people were taken into the civil service specifically to help deal with COVID, as well as the aftermath of Brexit. So, Arlene, I want to come to you first on this. Do you think that this is the right approach from government to kind of chop the civil service?
Well, I think there's the two issues here. First of all, in relation to dealing with the excessive numbers in the civil service, I understand the civil service did grow by 91,000 during Brexit and COVID. I think there does need to be a conversation. But before Paul comes in and tells me that the unions need to be involved, the unions do need to be involved. And I think the way in which this was announced was wrong. They should have been speaking to the unions about the fact that they needed to deal with these issues before a public announcement was made. I think the story appeared in the Daily Mail before the letter from Simon Case had gone out to the civil service. So I think that's wrong. And whilst if we do need to make cuts, and I think it's right that we look at efficiencies and we try to be more innovative, I do think the government needs to reflect that we are in a cost of living crisis, and therefore the government needs to reflect that. But there are ways to do this, and I think it was handled badly because staff morale is very important, and I think unfortunately this will have had a negative impact on staff morale at a time when it's pretty low anyway because of everything that has happened with COVID.
Paul, your response?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's bad politics because it looks like revenge. That's the truth of it, because, you know, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson have complained over the fact that workers are still working from home and not back at their desks. It seems to me that this is just a knee-jerk reaction, which is possibly a tactic to try to bring those workers and their unions to heel, to make them comply. I also have a fear if this is pushed through in terms of the thousands of jobs that could potentially go, what the impact would be in terms of the functioning of the civil service. I mean, at the moment, we have massive problems in the passport office. We have massive problems at DVLC, largely as a result of a lack of people working there to be able to process applications and so on. So, you know, what this will mean for people who are on hold, HMRC, for example, people often on hold for hours on end trying to get through. But Arlene's right, you know, you've got to, if they've got a genuine reason, then let's hear it. If there's a rationale behind it, then let's hear it and we can have a debate behind it, but around it. But simply releasing this to the media in a way that looks like revenge, I don't think is a good look at all, and it ought to be challenged.
I'm also a little bit curious about the sort of call to get people back into offices. We were sort of running out of time here, but my take on that is surely it needs to be down to individual businesses, doesn't it? I mean, if a business can run effectively with its staff working from home or some sort of hybrid model, and if then they're not spending the money on commuting costs, surely that's then more freed up money that they can spend in their towns and communities.
Well, I think it's one of those things. What matters is what works. I don't think you should necessarily be dogmatic about it. I mean, I have to say I like a working environment. I'm a bit of a convert when it comes to working from home. I think it does give people a better work-life balance. It saves people on commuting bills, for example. If it works for the organisation and the individual, I'm not sure it's the job of anyone else to intervene and say it shouldn't happen.
My gosh. Paul Embry there saying there shouldn't be state intervention. I'm shocked.
For once.
Exactly. Well, stay with us because coming up after the break, we're joined in the studio by Mira Naran, MBE, who's campaigning for safer roads in the UK after her son was tragically killed back in 2018. Don't go anywhere.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, And I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. In May 2018, Mira Naran's 8-year-old son Dev was tragically killed in a collision on a smart motorway. Since the horrific incident, Mira has tirelessly campaigned for safer roads in Dev's memory. As we approach the 4th anniversary of Dev's death, Mira is pressing the government to pass Dev's law. And Mira joins us now in the studio. Mira, firstly, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Can you just explain to us kind of what happened and why you're running this campaign?
So in 2018, my oldest son, he has drug-resistant epilepsy and suffers from lots of seizures. And that particular week, he was really poorly, and we rushed him into hospital. And one of the days, on the 31st, the doctor said that he may not make it through the night.
Gosh.
So we called his younger brother Dev to come and see him, and Dev saw his big brother. He gave him a big kiss, jumped into bed with him, and told him all about his day like he always did. And he said goodbye, and he left to go home. And on the way home, the car that he was travelling in stopped for unknown reasons, and a lorry crashed into the back of the car, killing Dev instantly.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And that night, I sat in hospital in the corridor, and on one side of the corridor, one of my sons was fighting for his life. And on the other side of the corridor, my younger son was dead.
Goodness. It must have been the toughest night of your life.
It breaks you. I lost everything that night as I sat on that floor in that corridor. Everything I knew, everything that existed, just in a moment, completely disappeared. And I had to make a decision of what I was going to do going forward. And I decided I was going to start campaigning for safer drivers on safer roads. And that's what I've been doing since.
So explain to us what specifically it is that you're campaigning for.
So my campaign initially started around raising awareness around smart motorways. Because he died on the M6 on a smart motorway, and I just didn't feel like enough people knew how to use them, what they were, and so on. And so in 2020, I proposed 19 policy changes to the government, of which 18 were agreed to. And just January this year, there's a pause in the rollout, and they've also committed £900 million to make them safer. So that's how far we've got with the motorway side of things. But for me, it's not just smart motorways; it's all roads. So I'm obviously really urging that we have safer roads overall across the UK. And my current campaign, Dev's Law, his 4th anniversary, I'm urging the government to mandate autonomous emergency braking, Dev's Law, which is an in-vehicle technology in your car or your vehicle. It basically detects a threat of a collision in front of you, which could be a stationary car or a pedestrian, and it automatically slows down or brakes entirely, preventing that crash. And experts have said that it could prevent nearly 1,000 collisions, fatalities over the next decade. And I'm campaigning alongside the AA, Edmund King, president of the AA, and I'm really urging the government to mandate this law.
Mira, I understand that what you're asking for has been rolled out across much of Europe already.
Yes.
What has your response been from legislators in this country, from MPs? Have you had a good response, and what is holding it back at the moment, do you think?
I'm not quite sure what's holding it back, to be honest. I proposed this actually in November last year, and I've not really had much of a response. I have actually received that we're going to have a meeting next week with officials. However, I don't have the agenda, and I'm not sure what that's going to be and what it's going to look like. But unfortunately, it has been very, very quiet. And July the 6th, this legislation is going to be rolled out across the EU. It's also been mandated in Australia as well. This technology exists, and it prevents rear-end collisions by nearly 40% and collisions with pedestrians by nearly 30 to 40%. That's huge. If that was one of our loved ones, if we could give them 40% or 30 to 40% of a pedestrian, save their lives, then surely it's something that we should be putting in all vehicles.
And Mira, is this a technology that would be rolled out in new vehicles?
In new vehicles, cars, vans, lorries and so on.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So in terms of kind of engagement around smart motorways with government, it seemed as though they listened well.
Yes, they welcomed my campaign, and since then I have both continued to challenge them, but also work alongside them. For me, it was about looking at solutions. It was about looking at what we can change and what we can do forward. There's a whole host of factors that were involved in Dev's death. Road deaths are complex. There are so many factors involved. The road was just one part of it. The other parts were the vehicle, technology in general, driver behaviour, education and so on. There's so many different elements to it. So roads was just basically the first step, and they accepted my proposals, of which 18 were agreed to. So I'm always optimistic, and I have to hold on to hope that I really do hope that they will mandate this law. At the end of the day, I'm just a mum. I'm just a mum asking the government to do the right thing.
And, you know, I see the best of the House of Commons in the work that I do. On telly, you usually see the worst, but you do see the best of it. And it's campaigns like this that really do, I think, grip us as politicians and get us really enthused to want to do something. Have you been engaging with things like all-party parliamentary groups and other groups of parliamentarians?
So I've been engaging with these Transport Select Committee, obviously ministers as well, MPs and so on. They have been very engaging, and I have seen a huge level of commitment from their side. However, this is not something that can be changed overnight. Of course, there's a lot of things to take into account. And obviously we've had an international global crisis over the last couple of years. So for me, it's about being realistic in that expectation. However, with autonomous emergency braking, Dev's law, it was actually discussed back in 2015.
Wow.
That far back. So for me, it's not something new. I'm not proposing something that doesn't exist. I'm not proposing a technology that, you know, hasn't worked across the globe, across countries, mandated in Australia as well, in the EU. This is something that we, as the UK, have been involved with the trials and the evidence base, which was involved with the EU before Brexit. So it's not like we're completely detached from the situation. We're very well aware of the trials, the evidence base, the logistics behind it as well. So I'm really hoping that they will really push this last bit and hopefully agree. It's Dev's anniversary on the 31st of May. 4 years he's been gone. He would be 12 right now. And we should be organising our holidays, summer holiday, what we're going to do this year, what we're going to do for his birthday. And instead, I'm pouring all of my grief into safer roads and safer drivers, and so everyone else can reach home, everyone's children can reach home, everyone's loved ones can reach home. This pain is devastating. It hurts every single day to wake up and have to remind myself Dev's not here. My baby's not here. And I don't want any family or any parent to have to wake up and do that. So if it means I continue to campaign for the rest of my life, I will do that.
Well, Mira, I think we can all agree that the sort of tenacity with which you have campaigned on this after such a tragedy is genuinely inspiring. And it was recognised because you were awarded an MBE for your campaigning prowess. How did it feel when you received it? It must have been a bit bittersweet. I
honestly don't feel worthy enough for that. Dev wanted to be a brain surgeon when he was younger. He said he wanted to help children like his brother with drug-resistant epilepsy. And he just loved people. He loved helping people. He wanted to make a difference. And I just feel this is all him. This is the love and memories he's left behind. And it's an honour of him. It's his. And I'm just trying to make it happen.
Well, Mira, honestly, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your story and for your valiant campaigning. And I'd love to engage with you separately on this to see how I can help in my role as an MP too. Mira Naran there joining us, talking about the incredible campaign that she's running on road safety. Now, I'm going to quickly throw over to Arlene because, as ever, lots of you have been getting in contact with us, and Arlene has got some views to read out, haven't you, Arlene?
I have, but before I do, can I just pass on my sympathy in terms of Dev's death as well? And as a mother of 2 boys, can I just say how impactful Mira's interview was today?
We seem to have...
For sharing.
There we go.
And for sharing your views. Sorry, have I been knocked off? Maybe I'm back again now.
You're back.
I'm back. I was just saying how much Mira's interview was a real impact for everyone watching, especially for those of us who have young boys. And thank you so much for coming in. As ever, more GB views coming in. I think that interview between Lee and Paul has generated a lot of attention. And Michael says, whilst it's not widely known, food banks first appeared in the UK under Tony Blair's Labour government. They've been in use from around 2003 throughout Labour's years in office and have not come into being because of the, in quotes, nasty Tory party. Trish says what we need is domestic science taught in schools again. That's where many of us learn to cook and, of course, from our parents as well. Alison says, in all fairness, and I think this is probably very true, I don't think you could refer to Paul Embry as a champagne socialist. In fact, he has made some good points. I usually like Lee Anderson, but found him overly aggressive today. Paul Embry remained measured and controlled. So I'm now going to go back to the measured and controlled Paul Embry.
Well, we'll go to the measured and controlled Paul Embry because you've also got some views for us there, Paul.
I have, yeah. David says, for Lee, addressing Lee Anderson, at first I agreed with you. Now I've seen how arrogant you are and I realise it's just lip service and a poor attempt to make the government look good. And Vince says, these are just life skills that used to be taught in schools in terms of food education, of course. It's common sense. Get it back now.
Plenty more as well. We've got Cliff saying, I think Lee Anderson's right. People can't cook anymore. I was taught to cook in school, but it's not taught anymore. We rely far too much on fast food and takeaways. We should also teach money management in our schools. And Paul, I've got a good one for you here. It's Jean. Jean says, I know it's not relevant, but I am so jealous of Paul's fabulous hair colour. There we go. That's what we've never had before. So
it's all real as well.
So what else we got here? We've got Andrew, another one agreeing with Lee. Lee Anderson's correct. A hand up, not a handout is what's needed. I'm surprised at Paul Embry, who seems to want to simply give handouts. God, it's a mixed bag for you, Paul, today, isn't it?
It is, yeah, which is what this show is all about, isn't it? And Stephen says, we all know someone who's working from home but spend sometimes gardening, having their hair done, their nails instead of working. It's about time they were back at their desks.
Well, I find this interesting. I used to, but in a past life, work for a company where we didn't kind of have working hours. It was all target-based. So as long as you got your work done, you hit your targets, they didn't mind whether you were in the office, whether you weren't, whether you took 4 hours off in the middle of the day to go for a walk or shopping or whatever. I always thought that was a really sensible approach, but I'd be very quickly curious. Arlene, what do you reckon?
Well, I think it's a mixture. I think sometimes you can be more productive at home because you've got quietness and you're focused and you're doing what you need to do. But if you're in a collaborative basis, and I was speaking to somebody from a private sector company last week, and he said productivity shot up once people came back into the office again. So I think largely it depends on what you're doing at a particular time, Deanna.
Yeah, well, send us your views, guys. Keep them coming in. That's it for the first hour here on The Political Correction. Stay with us because we've got another fabulous hour coming up.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching and listening to GB News. Coming up this hour, with the Prime Minister set to visit Northern Ireland in the coming days, what comes next in the protocol saga? The Education Secretary cuts off official contact with the National Union of Students over anti-Semitism. The government's decided to halt the ban on buy one get one free offers on junk food, but should they press ahead or scrap the idea entirely? That plus plenty more after the latest news with Miranda.
Thank you. Good morning. It's 11 o'clock. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Allies backing Finland and Sweden's NATO membership are pushing for a swift ratification process if they apply to join the alliance. Foreign ministers from 30 member countries are in Berlin for an informal meeting with the UK's Liz Truss, saying NATO's open door policy must be maintained. The talks come after Russia's President Putin warned Finland it would be a mistake to join.
We were very pleased to be joined by our friends Finland and Sweden. If they do apply to join NATO, the UK is strongly supportive of that. We're also working closely with the Ukrainians and the Poles and others to make sure that Ukraine has NATO standard defence. It's also important today that we focus on a global NATO, because as well as protecting Euro-Atlantic security, we also need to watch out for Indo-Pacific security too.
Russia's offensive in the Donbass region has lost momentum and fallen behind schedule, according to British military intelligence. It's as President Zelensky says Ukraine's counter-offensive has forced Russian troops to retreat from some areas of Kharkiv in the northeast of the country. The region's governor says ground has also been made near the Russian-held town of Izium, where Moscow's forces have been trying to fight their way south. The Prime Minister will urge Northern Ireland's politicians to get back to work after the DUP blocked the election of a speaker in the Stormont Assembly. Boris Johnson will travel to Belfast tomorrow for a series of crisis talks. Government sources say he'll use a series of private meetings to say parties must come together now if problems with the protocol are to be fixed. NHS prescription charges in England will be frozen for the first time in 12 years to help ease the cost of living crisis. Health Secretary Sajid Javid says the charges, which normally rise in line with inflation, will be held this year to put money back in people's pockets. The health department says the freeze will save people £17 million. The FBI is trying to determine whether a mass shooting in the US state of New York was a hate crime. An 18-year-old appeared in court after 10 people were killed at a supermarket in a predominantly black neighbourhood. Authorities say the suspect was armed with an assault-style rifle and drove to Buffalo from his home several hours away to launch the attack, which he broadcast in real time on social media. District Attorney John Flynn spoke outside the court.
The individual has been arraigned on murder in the first degree, which is the highest murder charge in New York State. Carries with it a sentence of life without parole, the highest punishment we have in New York State. A felony hearing will now take place in 5 days, and then the investigation continues. So we have taken the appropriate steps right now to get him behind bars.
Extra security measures have stopped nearly 20,000 attempts to smuggle drugs and weapons into prisons over the last 2 years. Justice Secretary Dominic Raab says X-ray body scanners and drug tracing machines are helping to enforce a zero-tolerance approach to drugs, knives and mobile phones. Former Australia cricket all-rounder Andrew Symonds has died in a car crash aged 46. Police are investigating the single vehicle accident in Queensland, which took place last night. Symonds played 26 tests, 198 one-day internationals, and won the World Cup in 2003 and 2007. And the Prime Minister has praised Ukraine after winning the Eurovision Song Contest. Boris Johnson called the win not only a reflection of talent, but unwavering support for the country's fight for freedom. Folk rap group Kalush Orchestra performed Stefania, which topped the poll, whilst the UK's Sam Ryder came in second place with his pop song Spaceman. Well, this is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to the political correction.
Good morning. You're watching and listening to GB News, and this is the Political Correction. We're here for the next hour to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. Coming up this hour, Boris Johnson is set to visit Northern Ireland in a bid to get all sides to work together to solve the Stormont gridlock and the protocol. What's the latest on this, and what can we expect from the Prime Minister's visit? The government decides to delay implementing its ban on 2-for-1 offers on junk food. We'll speak to Danielle Boxall from the Taxpayers Alliance about the decision. And the Education Secretary cuts off the National Union of Students over an internal culture of anti-Semitism. But what can be done to tackle this endemic problem? If you want to get involved in the conversation, as ever, then get in touch with us on GBViews at gbnews.uk, tweet us at GBnews, and we want to know, what did you do to celebrate Eurovision? So get in touch and share what you were up to last night, or your favourite Eurovision memory, because there have been some good ones over the years. Let us know. This is the Political Correction. The Prime Minister will visit Northern Ireland tomorrow in a bid to reach a solution to the ongoing gridlock over the protocol. Mr Johnson will urge politicians to restore power sharing and get back to work, following the DUP's refusal to elect a speaker in Stormont in opposition to the protocol, leaving the Assembly in gridlock. The DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, said a clear message is being sent on the protocol, but Sinn Féin's Vice President Michelle O'Neill said the DUP are denying democracy with their actions. So what is the latest in the protocol saga? And could the Prime Minister's trip provide a solution to the ongoing deadlock? Arlene, I obviously want to come to you first on this. What's going on?
Well, it's a very complicated issue, but I'll try and explain. Obviously, the protocol came into place in January of 2021. It causes checks between Great Britain and Northern Ireland in relation to goods that are coming, not just through Northern Ireland into the Republic of Ireland, but goods that are staying in Northern Ireland as well. And of course, that is the unacceptable point, because those goods are staying within the United Kingdom internal market. The Republic of Ireland's government know full well that that was going to happen with the protocol. but they insisted that the protocol went into place, and they overreached in relation to this issue. And they're continuing to overreach today. They're now saying that they're going to talk to the parties about getting Stormont up and running again. Frankly, it's none of the Republic of Ireland's business. That's an internal matter for the United Kingdom's government. The Prime Minister needs to come over and have those conversations tomorrow with the parties. It's a Strand 1, as we call it, issue under the Belfast Agreement, and therefore completely within the remit of the UK government and not within the remit of the Republic of Ireland's government. But they continue the overreach, as they did with the protocol and as they will now try to do with these talks tomorrow. But the protocol has to be replaced. I think the government have now fully recognised that. They did mention the Belfast Agreement in the Queen's speech, although they didn't mention any legislation. I hope that that will be rectified in the near future. And then we'll be able to have power sharing back in Northern Ireland again, because the fundamental problem that people don't understand about the Belfast Agreement is that it's about power sharing. It's not about majority rule. It is about power sharing. And if one community is completely rejecting the protocol, then the protocol has to be dealt with.
Well, Arlene, this is quite a hardline stance from the DUP, though, isn't it? Kind of imposing gridlock. Do you think it is entirely justified?
Well, it's not a surprise because, of course, in the past, when Sinn Féin didn't get their way on language legislation, they kept the people of Northern Ireland without a government for 3 whole years. And for those of us who live in Northern Ireland, the hypocrisy from Sinn Féin is quite staggering when we listen to them talking about the denial of democracy. We were denied democracy for 3 years, from 2017 until 2020. It was really quite disgraceful. But here we have a protocol that goes to the very constitutional position of Northern Ireland, the foundations of the Belfast Agreement, and it needs to be dealt with. And unless and until it is dealt with, I do not see unionism going back into that executive. And therefore, the Prime Minister has a big decision to make. Does he want power sharing in Northern Ireland, or does he want the protocol?
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, Arlene. And to discuss this further now, joining us is barrister and former DUP MP Emma Little-Pengelly. Emma, thank you for joining us on the show. Good morning. Again. What's your stance at the moment with regards to the kind of protocol dispute? Do you think that we're going to actually make progress?
Well, I think there have been a number of constructive conversations with the party leader in London, but of course we haven't seen anything concrete coming forward. So I think what's happened here, as Arlene I think helpfully pointed out there, the DUP have been raising concerns about this protocol for some considerable time, for some years in fact, and unfortunately action hadn't been taken. Now, over the last number of years, we have been able to keep the Northern Ireland Executive and the Northern Ireland Assembly up and going in parallel with those discussions. But of course, we need to get resolution, and we need to get resolution now. So I think what you're seeing is an escalation of that, trying to send a very clear message to the Prime Minister and to the government of the United Kingdom that they need to move to address the serious issues of the protocol. It's not just causing significant problems with trade, as outlined there, but it's causing serious fractions within the local community as well. People are very unhappy about this protocol. They don't want this barrier between Great Britain and Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom, and they expect their British Prime Minister to stand up for them and to address these issues before the situation gets much worse, with grace periods ending and with possible divergence, for example, in Great Britain. So there are serious concerns about what this protocol will mean, not just now, but into the future. So the DUP are trying to say to the Prime Minister, we need action and we need it urgently.
Mm-hmm. So, Emma, you said that there's a lot of communities that are very unhappy with the impact of the protocol, but surely there are also going to be communities that are not going to be very happy that the government once again in Northern Ireland is back in gridlock.
No, and of course we want to avoid gridlock, but the best way of avoiding that gridlock is to get this movement on the protocol by the Prime Minister. And of course we want Northern Ireland to work. The DUP wants Northern Ireland to work, to do the best it very much can. But feel that it simply cannot do that moving forward if this protocol is in place. That the protocol will be very damaging for the economy of Northern Ireland, for business, for consumers, and of course, in terms of our place within the United Kingdom. And we believe our place within the United Kingdom is critical to the success of Northern Ireland moving forward. So, the DUP undoubtedly will work constructively with the UK government, with the Prime Minister, but we must see that change. And the message to Jeffrey Donaldson is sending to the Prime Minister is you can't have the protocol and working power sharing government in Northern Ireland. Important to bear in mind, not a single unionist elected last week supports the protocol. So therefore, our system's only ever worked by consensus. And what we've seen over the last 2 years is all other parties in Northern Ireland absolutely discarding, demeaning, dismissing the genuine concerns of the unionist community. It's not a surprise, perhaps, that nationalism doesn't care as much about this protocol because, of course, they don't care about those links with the rest of the United Kingdom. So it shouldn't come as a surprise. It's unionists that are most worried about this and who most want to see this change and put back together our single market of an internal market of our United Kingdom.
Arlene?
Yeah, so Emma, I don't know whether you noticed today, but Simon Coveney has written an opinion piece in the Sunday Telegraph where yet again he's misrepresenting the Belfast Agreement and talking about the majority of MLAs in Stormont are pro-protocol. But surely that misses the entire point of the Belfast Agreement, which is about power sharing.
No, absolutely. And that's the bedrock of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. Over the course of the last 20, 25 years, there's been a clear majority of unionism within the Northern Ireland Assembly and the Northern Ireland Executive. And of course, they couldn't have government by majority then, and they wouldn't have government by majority then, because the key emphasis of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement was all around this power sharing and government by consensus to make sure that all parts of society here in Northern Ireland were brought into the process and were content by consent with that process. Now, what we've seen is a fracturing of that, with unionism not consenting to that, unionism being very unhappy with the protocol issue, and yet the other parties have entirely dismissed and disregarded that. And I think that's what we're seeing. You're seeing the result of that happening over the last number of years, the discontent growing around this protocol and really demands for this change. People are on the ground, people across unionism in Northern Ireland are not prepared to allow this protocol to continue. They want to see this change urgently. Now, they were told, let's leave some space for the UK government and the EU to have these negotiations and try to find resolution. And the DUP give the governments that space to try to find a resolution. That didn't happen. We're now a further number of years down the line. And, I would appeal to everybody who is speaking about the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, including what we've seen today, as Arlene has mentioned there in the Telegraph, to actually go back to the core principles. If you talk about protecting the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, you must protect that concept of power sharing by consent, power sharing by people agreeing to come together in the recognition and mutual recognition of what is important to each part of that careful balance within Northern Ireland. That simply hasn't been happening, and that's why we're seeing this instability. So if we're going to build those stable institutions for the future, this has to be addressed.
Thanks, Emma. I've got one final question. We're a bit pushed for time, so I might need a snappy answer. There's a lot of talk around whether the government can scrap the protocol. There's references to it could potentially be a breach in international law. We've had the Attorney General say that wouldn't be the case and we can scrap it. As a kind of barrister, what's your take?
Well, I think these issues are not clear-cut. So, we hear a very simple narrative that, they simply can't do this. Now, they'll have taken very, very strong legal advice, I've no doubt. And there are certainly things that they can do. But of course, sadly, they would have to take this action because the EU won't agree with the UK government on sensible proposals for the way forward. So, there's still time for the EU to wise up and to actually come to the table and find those solutions to the barriers on trade and the issues that the protocol is causing. But certainly, in terms of the constructive conversations with the UK government, there seems to be a strong indication that they can take that action.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Emma Little-Pengelly there, former DUP MP and barrister, giving her take on the latest in the Northern Ireland Protocol saga. Well, now I'm delighted to say that we're joined in the studio by our very own, the broadcasting legend, Alistair Stewart, to talk about what's coming up on his show at midday. Alistair.
Hello.
What are you going to be talking about today?
I'm dead chuffed to come in a little bit early and listen to that conversation there, because we're doing a bit on Northern Ireland and on the protocol, but we're coming at it from a slightly different angle. But it just strikes me, I reported on the Good Friday Agreement, sat down and did an interview with the lovely, late and much lamented and missed Mo Mowlam, and the euphoria of peace in our time. That's what it was all about. And I just wonder, on reflection, if then, as now, people really thought profoundly about the fact that you had two massive integrities banging their heads against one another. One is the integrity of the single market and the European Union. And whatever you think of the European Union, they are entitled in law and treaty to defend their integrity. And secondly, the integrity of the United Kingdom that Emma and Arlene were just talking about there. So, I mean, it really is incredibly profound stuff, which your last segment demonstrated. We're going to come at it from a slightly different angle as well, though, and that is, why on earth should we care about it? Well, if you want to buy stuff that is manufactured in Northern Ireland here, there are issues. But if you own a company or work for a company that either manufactures stuff that you want to flog in Northern Ireland or raw materials that they need in Northern Ireland, then, goodness gracious me, you're hit by that as well. So we're going to be talking to a couple of business voices from Northern Ireland, one who's been on the programme before and another who speaks for the Federation of Small Businesses and is also a consultant. So we've got a lot on that. The other thing that we're going to be doing is the cost of living crisis. I tweeted that we were going to do that and begged the question whether people, you know, are they standing on their own 2 feet enough, and shouldn't we all just try a little bit harder before we go rat-a-tat-tat on the door of the state? And I was accused of being a 1930s fascist dragging things back to
welcome to the Dark Ages.
Yeah, but
that sounds like
what
Twitter,
really
to be
amused
honest.
me was, that was some of them, and we love free debate here at GB News, but others came back onto my social media and said, yeah, actually, we do need a little bit, not of the fascism of the 30s, but that self-reliance and self-dependence before we go knocking on the door of the state. But the final point is that, and people should have a look at the stuff with the NatWest Bank report and the interview with Howard Davis in The Telegraph, which shows that because Rishi froze the thresholds, 2.5 million people come July will be dragged into higher rate taxation, while the lower 20-25% of the population are facing a £1,200 hit. It really is a nation of two halves, and someone's going to have to do something about it. But if Rishi goes for an emergency budget, Labour will have a party.
I think you're right.
I think the debate on welfare will be interesting. I look forward to that, because I mean it has to be nuanced, that debate. I think, because I think most people would agree that the welfare state has to be a safety net, not a comfort blanket, and that actually there are people genuinely struggling. I think something like 40% of people on universal credit are in work. So, we have to recognise that.
I find in-work benefits one of the most offensive introductions in this country. I mean, I think if somebody is an employer and are offering a job, then it is morally an obligation upon them to pay a rate that is good enough for somebody to live on, not for the state, other taxpayers, then to come in and bail them out. So all of that will be there. Peter Lilly is joining me on the sofa.
So I'll get out the studio quickly then.
You'll enjoy that conversation.
Oh, definitely will. Well, definitely tune in to Alistair's show, 12 o'clock, Alistair Stewart and Friends. Sounds like he's got some big topics, and as usual, his fantastic charm too. Coming up next on The Political Correction, Education Secretary Nadeem Zahawi cuts off official contact with the National Union of Students over anti-Semitism. But what needs to be done to end anti-Jewish sentiment on our campuses? And get involved in the conversation by telling us, what did you do for Eurovision and what are your favourite Eurovision memories? Let us know. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. Don't go anywhere.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. The government have said that the planned ban on 2-for-1 offers and the TV advertising ban for unhealthy food has been delayed until October 2023. The move, announced as part of the government's strategy for tackling obesity, has caused disputes between different groups, with health campaigners backing the policy and criticising the delay, and others slamming the plans as an ineffective big state measure. In the midst of a cost of living crisis, is the government right to delay the ban? Should they scrap it entirely? Or, to help tackle obesity, should they go ahead? Well, joining us now to discuss this is the media campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, Danny Boxall. Danny, thank you for joining us this morning. You must have been dead chuffed, weren't you, when you saw that it had been delayed?
Thanks for having me on the show, Deanna. Well, we were quite chuffed, actually, that it had been delayed, but not quite as much as you might think, because, you know, ultimately this delay is just delaying the inevitable, which is this policy coming in altogether, which is what we really want to see scrapped. So the best thing the government could do was to get rid of this policy altogether, as it's really going to impact families with their cost of living, people on the breadline, people that really need these kind of deals, these one-get-one offers, multiple buy deals, so that they can manage their weekly shop and make sure that they're not being hounded by increasing prices when, you know, we're already seeing inflation making prices of food and drink a lot more expensive than it has been for the last few years.
Key campaigners on health, though, are saying that this is one of the real vital measures that can help tackle obesity. But my read of the government's own impact assessments is that that's not actually the case, is it?
Yeah, so the government's own impact assessment says that the actual impact of this is going to be reducing people's calorie intakes by just 3 calories a day. So I think at the end of the day, people are going to buy what they want, and it's just going to end up costing them more to do that. So this doesn't even seem to be a well thought out policy. And it's not exactly like other sin taxes, like the sugary drinks tax, which is actually giving the government a bit of money. This is just going to give some more money to supermarkets. So I don't think it's a very well thought out policy, and that's why they should scrap it altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Danny, I mean, the truth is that we do have serious obesity problems in this country, and actually the research shows that obesity-related conditions cost the National Health Service something like £6 billion per annum. I mean, I would have thought, if I could say so, that the Taxpayers Alliance might have a view on that in terms of finding a way to stop that spend or to reduce it. So isn't there a legitimate case to say, look, for health reasons, but also for economic reasons, measures like this need to be taken?
Well, yeah, of course, but obese people do pay taxes as well, so it's not as if like we're paying for them without them paying taxes on top of that. So they are paying into the system, so they should be able to receive the care that they need. And it's not, I think the sort of way we look at how much money goes on obese spending is not really taking into effect that people will have health problems somewhere down the line in their lifetime. So I don't think that spend is actually going to go away if we do bring in measures like this. And if these measures actually work, which it hasn't been proven to do so, it doesn't really seem to work because we know people just buy what they want to buy, particularly people, busy families. They will just buy the same thing every week because it makes it easier for them to plan and to budget. So these measures aren't actually going to make much of a difference at all anyway. So the spend isn't really going to come down at all.
And Danny, of course, it's not just the buy one, get one free offers, is it? It's also been announced that the proposed junk food advertising ban is also going to get pushed back. Again, the right approach?
Well, I don't think the junk food advertising ban is actually going to have much of an effect. I mean, I don't know about you, but I personally don't come into contact with many adverts on TV myself. I watch a lot of streaming on demand and that kind of thing. So I think that's the way most people are going. So they're not really going to come into contact with these adverts anyway. And I don't really think they have much impact on what people want to eat. I think, people generally have their taste, they like them, and it doesn't really get impacted by whether, there's going to be a ban or not a ban. So I think the best thing for the government to do would be to scrap this completely and just allow companies and allow individuals to do what they want to do, buy what they want to buy and eat what they want to eat.
Mm-hmm. But Danny, if we accept that obesity is a huge kind of challenge that the country's facing, what sort of steps do you think the government could be taking to actually tackle that problem in an effective way?
Well, I know you guys had Lee Anderson on the show earlier, and I think his comments about, helping families with budgeting and helping families with cooking classes are a really good idea. And I think there is a lot that we can. I mean, let's talk about the other side of obesity and talking about exercise as well. It's not just about what people are eating. It's about, how much exercise people are doing. And we know that people aren't doing as much manual labour as they used to. So that's could be one reason why we're seeing increasing obesity levels. So it's about really getting people out and about and exercising, as well as making sure that, they are responsible for their own personal health in terms of their diet as well. But at the end of the day, it's down to people what they want to eat and how they want to live their lives. And I don't think that's the decision of the government to be coming in and interfering with.
Mm-hmm. Arlene?
Well, I understand we have very little time, but very briefly, Danielle, I wanted to ask you the question about suppliers, because whilst I agree that the ban should not go ahead on buy one, get one free for consumers, I always think of the farmers in this instance and the suppliers, because they are sometimes pushed by the supermarkets to do these loss leader events, and actually they are the ones that suffer, not actually the supermarkets themselves.
Yeah, of course, but we're living in a cost of living crisis at the moment, and for families, I think these kind of deals. I mean, the Public Health England's own report, which initially recommended this idea in 2015, said that the last time that there was these kind of high inflationary pressures, so after 2008, that families really relied on these kind of deals to help them protect them from the worst effects of high inflationary pressures. So, we've got to think about what's best for everybody in the cost of living crisis that we're going through right now. And I think going ahead with something like this would be terrible for the economy as a whole, but particularly bad for, those families that are really struggling.
Well, Danny, thank you for joining us to share your insights today. Danny Boxall, their Media Campaigns Manager from the Taxpayer Alliance. Well, don't go anywhere, because coming up on the Political Correction, Nadeem Zahawi announces he's cutting off all official contact with the National Union of Students over anti-Semitism. And an employment tribunal rules that calling a man bald is sexual harassment. But is it? And finally, what do you like to do for Eurovision? What are your favourite Eurovision memories? Let us know by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweeting us at GBNews, and we'll go through them at the end of the show. So don't go anywhere. But before all of that, here is your latest news.
Good morning, it's 11:32. The top stories from the GB newsroom. First, some breaking news this hour, and Finland has confirmed it will apply for NATO membership. The announcement comes after President Putin warned the country it would be a mistake to join. Foreign ministers from 30 member states are meeting in Berlin today, also discussing Sweden's plans to join the alliance. Meanwhile, Russia's offensive in the Donbass region has lost momentum and fallen behind schedule, according to British military intelligence. It's as President Zelensky says Ukraine's counter-offensive has forced Russian troops to retreat from some areas of Kharkiv in the northeast of the country. The Prime Minister will urge Northern Ireland's politicians to get back to work after the DUP blocked the election of a Speaker in the Stormont Assembly. Boris Johnson will travel to Belfast tomorrow for crisis talks, where he'll say parties must come together if problems with the protocol are to be fixed. The FBI is trying to determine whether a mass shooting in the US state of New York was a hate crime. An 18-year-old suspect appeared in court after 10 people were killed at a supermarket in a predominantly black neighbourhood. Authorities say he was armed with an assault-style rifle and drove to Buffalo from his home several hours away to launch the attack, which he broadcast in real time on social media. And the Prime Minister has praised Ukraine's Eurovision win, calling it not only a reflection of talent, but unwavering support for the country's fight for freedom. Folk rap group Kalush Orchestra performed Stefania, which topped the poll, while the UK's Sam Ryder finished second with his pop song Spaceman. Well, on TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Straight back to the political correction in just a moment. Stay with us.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the political correction. The Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, has cut off official engagement with the National Union of Students following a throng of allegations of institutional anti-Semitism within the organisation. Since the election of Shaima Dalali as the next NUS president, the government and Jewish representative bodies have cited major concerns about the treatment of Jewish students. So why has the Department for Education felt the need to take this action now? And what needs to be done to tackle endemic anti-Semitism on British campuses? Paul, I'm very keen to come to you first on this because, of course, whilst it's a student story, it's a union story too.
Yeah, and I'm concerned about it. I don't like to hear of any government effectively cutting off a union, which in this case represents millions of people, millions of students in this country. That's not to say, of course, that anti-Semitism isn't a great evil. Of course it is and needs to be tackled wherever it rears its head. And I think some things have come out of the senior echelons of the NUS over recent years that probably do give cause for concern. But in their defence, they have commissioned an independent investigation to be led by a QC. I would have liked to see the government await the outcome of that before taking any precipitate action. And as I say, the NUS isn't just about the leadership, it's about those millions of students across the country who do deserve a voice and do deserve that voice to be carried through to government. And for me, it's almost the equivalent of, you know, we know that the Metropolitan Police, for example, after the Stephen Lawrence inquiry was condemned as being institutionally racist, no government would have seriously disengaged with the Metropolitan Police. What they said is, look, get your house in order, we'll assist you where you can, but it's up to you to address it. And I would have liked to see a similar approach to the NUS. Yes, raise concerns, yes, drive out anti-Semitism, but don't effectively cut off a voice that speaks for millions of people.
Arlene, do you agree?
No, I don't agree, because the NUS has never represented the views of all of their students, and that's the fundamental problem. They engage in international grievances and don't actually deal with the issues that students are concerned about. When I was a student, they were pro-Irish republicanism, so they didn't represent me. I never engaged with the NUS, and that's their fundamental problem. They take themselves off in these directions that they don't need to go down, instead of actually being a voice. And Paul talks about a union being a voice for students. They're not a voice for students. There are so many students that are alienated from the NUS, always have been. And what I would have to say about this is, what took you so long? I mean, they shouldn't have been engaging with them for quite a while.
I must say, I think if there was a properly representative kind of student body, the government should engage. But kind of like you, Arlene, I mean, I was elected to the NUS. I was at Hull University, went to a NUS conference as a delegate a couple of times, and it was awful. I mean, the things that they were discussing were not the issues facing students. We were talking about international policy, we were talking about Israel-Palestine. I'm not saying these things are not very important issues, but you'd think they'd be campaigning on, strikes by tutors. You think they'd be campaigning on cost of living. You think they might be campaigning on maintenance loans and maintenance grants. But instead, unfortunately, there seems to be this very sort of highly charged, politicised section of the NUS that seem to climb up the sort of greasy pole of the NUS, make it to the top, and then take the whole institution in very interesting directions. Paul, can you recognise some of that?
Well, to a certain degree, and I'm someone within the trade union movement who thinks there has been an imbalance in the priorities of trade union leaderships over recent years, where they do focus too much on international issues and not necessarily on the bread and butter workplace issues. But that, I think, is an issue internally for the union and its membership to deal with. I'm certainly not someone who believes that the world stops at the workplace door. I mean, I'm a member of the Fire Brigades Union. We never say that the world stops at the fire station door. We're part of the wider labour movement, both in this country and internationally, and where we see injustice, we will show solidarity with those who are suffering that injustice. But of course, most people, it's doubtless most people join a union because they want that union to represent them on bread and butter workplace issues. But I don't think that's for the government to come in and say, you don't represent your members, therefore we're not even going to talk to you. I think that's for the union to deal with internally.
Well, we're going to stick on the theme now of the anti-Semitism, because joining us to discuss this is the editor of the GBNews, Richard Ferrer. Richard, thank you for joining us this morning. What was your reaction to Nadeem Zahawi's announcements?
Oh, thanks for having me on, by the way. Good morning, everyone. Shock and a sense of inevitability. I mean, as Paul said, the NUS represents thousands of students nationwide, 600 student unions. It prides itself on its anti-racism credentials, has done since I was a student way back in the midst of times, defending minorities. And to have an organisation like that have its government funding cut and to lose its place on the table at the Department of Education because, and let's not forget, being investigated by the Charities Commission because the Education Secretary suspects it's a snake pit of Jew hate. I suggest that the current leadership of the NUS hangs its head in shame.
Do you recognise that there is a serious problem with anti-Semitism within the NUS and maybe more broadly on our campuses?
Well, I mean, as Arlene also alluded to, I mean, it's always been a political hotbed, campus life. You know, 10, 15 years ago, they were focusing, when Wes Streeting, the current Shadow Health Secretary, was president of the NUS, they focused on the things that mattered. You know, the cost of living crisis, student tuition fees, housing for students on campus. I was reading this morning that 2 in 5 British families have had to cut the cost of their food shopping in the last month. I mean, you can imagine how that must be hitting students on campus. These are the day-to-day issues that the NUS used to focus on. Now, of course, it's run by militant ideologues with colossal Corbynite chips on their shoulder, who see less about the day-to-day reality that they should be focusing on and focus more on the perceived sins of Western ideology, and of course, and foreign policy, and specifically the politics of the Middle East and Israel. They can't change that sphere. Hamas is a brutal dictatorship, and they're not Israeli, so they don't have a vote in Israel. So I suggest they focus on what they can achieve and how they can improve the lots of students on campus today and stop this nonsense.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the NUS will reform, though?
No, of course it won't. I mean, if you look at some of the bullet points, if you look at some of the reasons why we have got to this stage, it's an ongoing issue. And I suggested maybe 10, 15 years ago, it had its priorities right. But since then, it's just been an absolute catalogue. One former president of the the National Union of Students called Birmingham University an outpost of Zionism. While in post as the president, it's boycotted Israel and adopted loads of different campaigns about isolating Israel. Its current president is alleged to have told Jews to segregate themselves if they don't like what they hear. I'm trying to think, they've ignored Judaism on an NUS questionnaire about religion. The incumbent president, I believe, has sorry, not the incumbent, the one that's coming on after the current one, has tweeted threats to Jews and sympathised with Hamas. It all adds up to one message, doesn't it? Students are not welcome on campus in the NHS if you're Jewish, because it translates to this mob mentality of isolating Israel and picking on Jews through anti-Zionism.
Well, Richard, that's all we have time for, but thank you for joining us this morning to share your insights. Richard Ferrer there, the editor of Jewish News. Now it's time for an update on the week's biggest stories from the world of sport, and I'm delighted to say we're joined by our very own sports commentator and broadcaster, Aidan McGee. Aidan, big weekends. Yeah, it was. I mean, let's start with the FA Cup yesterday, and Paul and I talk regularly about Football Offset, which you'll know, I'm sure you overhear. We talk a lot about the diminishment of the FA Cup over the last 20 years or so, and we talked about the movement of the kick-off yesterday. It started at 4:45, I think the BBC... That was frustrating for me, because I was in the pub trying to watch the end of the Sheffield United match, and they cut it off before the end. You'd have been in a pub whatever time the kick-off was. Shocking. You won, didn't you? No. Sheffield United lost 2-1 to Forest. Thanks for the reminder. Anyway, sorry, carry on. I was providing sports input. I should know that. I'll get sacked at this rate. No, listen, back to the FA Cup. 4:45 kick-off, a little bit late. We usually expect it to kick off at 3 o'clock. I guess it didn't disappoint in terms of the actual run of play. It was an interesting match. It was watchable. Yeah, for a 0-0, it was a decent game. Yeah, for a 0-0. I mean, it's the old adage, but you normally want goals. We didn't get any, and we had the drama. It went to extra time. We had the penalties and everything. Mm-hmm. We had the booing of the was it national anthem or Abide With Me? Both. Yeah. At the very beginning, the club having condemned that. I suppose you could split hairs and say, well, it's anyone's right to voice their opinion at a match. I don't remember that much. I mean, of Liverpool fans' anti-royalist sentiment down the years. They played in plenty of cup finals, although this was their first FA Cup final in 10 years. But their fans have assured us on social media this morning that it's quite commonplace for them to voice their opinion
on such matters.
The abide with me one, Aidan, I found bizarre. I mean, I know, you know, there's that saying, Scouse not English, that Liverpool fans often use, and there's a bit of antipathy towards the Tory
There's a strong
government.
Irish community in Liverpool as well.
Absolutely.
I think that plays into
and
it
obviously they're angry over things like the state cover-up of Hillsborough, the lack of support from Maggie Thatcher in the 1980s saw Liverpool go into decline. What I can say, Abide With Me is a unifying anthem that's been played before every FA Cup final since time immemorial. Why would anyone want to boo that?
I don't know. I mean, maybe it could have been. I mean, you were saying initially you thought it was a din in the background.
Yeah, but
maybe the mics just picked it up in a different way yesterday. It can be different with the acoustics of the modern stadium sometimes, and that would have maybe heightened it a little bit. I don't know, but you know, I have heard that Scouse not English thing many times before. But as I say, the club have not said anything. I don't know if they plan to. It was widely condemned yesterday. Ed Davey came out and Lindsay Hoyle as well. Both voiced their disapproval. But as I say, reasonable game. It was OK, but we expected a few goals. And I look back at the number of FA Cup finals over the last 20, 30 years. I mean, you can count on one hand. In fact, specifically, you can count on two fingers the number of decent FA Cup finals we've had. 2014, Hull went 2-0 up, didn't they? And lost to Arsenal 3-2. Yeah. That was a good one. West Ham, Liverpool, 2006. And a big day. Talking of Liverpool, because they're still on course for the quadruple, but they need Manchester City to slip up. They're playing at West Ham today. Big games at the bottom of the Premier League. You
forgot to mention 1982 when your team QPR got beat by Spurs. You left that one out.
All right.
That was a pretty good final as well, wasn't it?
That was a terrible final. The first one was absolutely lamentable. I mean, I've only seen it on video, but I mean, it was awful. And then the replay we played a lot better in the replay. It was Glenn Hoddle penalty. Yeah, but that was 40 years ago.
Yeah, I remember it.
Yeah, well, good.
So, quick prediction then. Are Liverpool going to get the quadruple?
I don't think they'll get the quadruple, no, just because I think Manchester City is so imperious and so strong at the moment. They won 5-1 at Wolves, much to Paul's chagrin.
Thanks.
But they were brilliant, though, weren't they?
They were brilliant. It was men and boys. It really was.
Exactly. And I didn't think Wolves played that badly on the day, but City was so good, particularly Kevin De Bruyne. I can't see them slipping up. I could see Liverpool walking away with 2 domestic trophies, which they've already won, and possibly Champions League as well. We'll wait and see.
Well, we will. Aidan, thank you so much for joining us to share the latest in the world of sport. But if you've just joined us, then you would have missed MP Lee Anderson clashing with our very own Paul Embry. Just a reminder, Lee Anderson is the Conservative MP who got into some hot water earlier this week when he suggested in the House of Commons that you can make a meal for as little as 30 pence a day. Let's have a listen to his remarks.
My invitation is to everybody on that side of the House. Come to Ashfield and work with me for a day in my food bank and see that the brilliant scheme we've got in place, where when people come now for a food parcel, they have to register for a budgeting course and a cooking course. And what we do at the food bank, we show them how to cook cheap and nutritious meals on a budget. We can make a meal for about 30 pence a day.
Well, like I said, Lee came on our show in the last hour and didn't really see eye to eye with Paul Embry.
But there's another factor here, isn't there? And it's whether or not government is doing enough for people in this cost of living crisis. I mean, we've just had a decade or more of austerity under your government. You've cut universal credit for some of the poorest families. You won't put a windfall tax on the energy companies to help alleviate some of the pressures that people have got in terms of their fuel bills. Real wages are falling. So it's not just about teaching people how to make beans on toast. It's about getting money into people's pockets through taking the right economic measures, isn't it?
So have you ever spoken to food bank users?
Yes.
And what they said to you?
Well, a myriad of things, as they always would.
OK, like what?
Well, do you want me to recount whole conversations I've had with food bank users? I mean, I'd ask you to answer the question that I put to you. The reality is that your government isn't doing enough. So simply lecturing people about how to boil an egg isn't going to cut it, is it? You need to do more economically to get money into people's pockets.
So I take it you've not actually spoken to any food bank users. That's normally the case when people like you have a go at me. I speak to lots of food bank users embedded in my community, and the government is providing billions and billions of pounds of support, local support, which people can access. If people are struggling, they can get in contact with me or the local authority for that extra support. There's £22 billion gone in to help some of the most vulnerable families in this country. I'm trying to do my bit for my community to make sure that they make the best use of the money they've got available. What are you doing?
Well, I'd say, I've been an active trade unionist all of my life, and I fight for people in the workplace, and I'm very proud of that. What are you doing in terms of universal credit? Did you oppose the cut to universal credit? What are you doing in terms of a windfall tax on the energy companies? Are you supporting that? Are you supporting real measures that will alleviate the pressures from on people, or are you just lecturing them about how
I'm supporting this government, making sure we've got an economy that's growing, which it is, that there's jobs. I think there's 1 million vacancies in this country. I challenge you, Paul. Is it Paul? I challenge you to come up to my constituency in Ashfield, come and visit the food bank I help at, come and talk to the service users there, come and talk to the most vulnerable members of my society. Get off your high horse, come up here and speak to some real people instead of be champagne socialists.
Well,
how's that grab you?
Let me say, when it comes to talking to real people, you don't have a monopoly on that. I speak to real people all the time. I'm rooted in the labour movement. I come from a working class community. And in terms of food banks, I probably won't need to come to your constituency, Mr. Anderson, because there are so many food banks. There are so many food banks in this country now that I could just go down the road.
I think I need to act as referee here, and just. Well, there we go. I got my own little bit of reffing there. Anyway, I thought it was a cracking interview, very fiery, probably one of the spiciest ones we've had on.
We need a round 2 next week, I think, don't we?
OK, well, we'll get that.
We'll have a rematch.
Ding, 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 round 2. Anyway, loads of you getting in touch, as always. On Eurovision, we've got John who says, my favourite Eurovision memory for almost every year is being in control of the remote and being able to switch the appalling rubbish off.
on Eurovision also, John Taylor says, did we get so many votes because the UK have been so supportive of Ukraine? Normally the rest of Europe seem to hate us. Is it the Boris effect? I have to say, I think there should be a confirmatory vote on this. I don't think the people of Europe knew what they were voting for. So let's go back to the people and do it all over again.
Well, on John's point there, though, I mean, we got 12, usually we're nil pois. I think, the act was exceptional, so I think that clearly worked in our favour, but usually it feels like there's politics involved, and yet we got 12 points, not just from Germany, we got 12 points from France.
I mean, I nearly fell off the chair when I saw that came in. That was very unexpected.
Well, likewise, and a few more views here as well. We've got Annette who says, as a Remain voter, I completely blame the House of Commons and mainstream media stance during the government negotiations with the EU, and thus are totally to blame for the Northern Ireland Protocol. The negotiators had their hands tied when they were forced to let the EU know they could not walk away without a negotiated agreement. Our so-called liberal elite did everything possible to overrule the democratic referendum results. Arlene?
Yeah, and David Weller from Belfast is saying, and it's good to hear that there are people watching from Northern Ireland listening to what we have to say about the protocol. I think we should just carry on as normal, forget all the border controls into Northern Ireland. If Europe want a border check on the island of Ireland, let them do it and police it, because it's their single market.
Well, one very quickly that we said we were going to discuss, which is this strange story this week that an employment tribunal has hit the headlines after ruling that commenting on a man's baldness in the workplace counts as sexual harassment. Arlene, what do you make of that?
Well, I have to declare an interest in this. I am married to a bald man, so I feel I should defend him at all costs. And you know what? If it's OK to comment on Paul Embry's hair colour, I think it's probably OK to comment on somebody's baldness as well.
Paul?
I think it's probably the logical conclusion of the law. So I think they probably got the decision right, because baldness does affect men much more than it affects women. So in that respect, it is a form of sexual harassment. But I think it's a bit of a nonsense, to be honest. Have good, strong laws to prevent harassment in the workplace, but don't delve into this kind of identity politics the whole time. I think it's counterproductive.
And I must say that the thing that made me smirk about it was the fact that I think it's 3 people making the decision were all bald men. Not that there was a vested interest there at all either. Well, I think it's been a good show today, Paul.
Yeah, I think it has. I'm looking forward to Lee Anderson coming back on the show, and we can finish off our conversation. That should be fun.
And Arlene, of course, this situation on the Northern Ireland Protocol is not going away, so I'm sure we'll be revisiting it in weeks to come.
No, we'll continue with that, and I hope there'll be progress next week. Just to say, last night when the Eurovision was on, I was listening to the wonderful Black Dyke Band, who had come over to Northern Ireland for a concert, so I just want to give them a shout-out this morning, as I do to my son, George, whose birthday it is today. So happy birthday, George, and I hope you have a great day.
Well, a very happy birthday to you, George, from all of us here at GB News. Paul, what are you up to this afternoon?
I will probably be going to the pub, heading back on the train to East Anglia and sitting by a river with a pint of cider, I think.
Sounds perfect. Well, guys, thank you for joining us. You've been watching and listening to The Political Correction. Join us next Sunday at 10 a.m. for 2 hours of discussion, debate and analysis of the week's biggest political stories. And up next, it's the wonderful Alistair Stewart.
Looking ahead to the weather, though, and it's rather warm and humid. Sunny spells, scattered showers, some thundery. These are the details.
Well, it's going to be dry across much of the southwest of England by lunchtime with plenty of warm sunshine and light winds. Feeling warm and humid with temperatures reaching around 21 degrees Celsius.
Have your umbrella at hand across southeast England and London, as a few showers are possible. Could be heavy at times. Drier and brighter across Wales for midday.